Hey, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing the color combo for February 2024 for PM Artist Studio Facebook group Makers of Mixed Media Art and Artists. Every month they pick new colors by Carrie Crafter, I'll link him below, and Paula Keene. So this month I'm going to be doing a painting inspired by Kathy Arbor, and she'd done some paintings inspired by this book, Painting Imaginary Flowers by Sandrine Pellisier. And I was really inspired to order a copy of the book myself, and we're going to use that for this month's color combo. And this month the color is turquoise and chartreuse, which is more of a yellowy green. So I'm adding this fluorescent yellow to the green to make a chartreuse. And the third color is a terracotta. And you can also use white, black, and a metallic. I'm also going to use a little bit of some alcohol inks in this project as well. So this is an open challenge using the hashtag MakersColorComboFeb24, and that's color with a U. So for my base for my painting, I'm going to be making some Gelliprints, and I'm going to use this design that I made for PM Artist Studio. This one's called Fancy Fishnet, and I will use some other stencils as well. So I'm starting off on my large 12 by 14 plate. I want to make a big piece to use for a 12 by 12 canvas. So I'm going to be putting all the colors on this plate, and I'm just burring the stencil randomly, flipping it over, putting it off and on. PM Art Studio, they call this the shadow technique. So I didn't, obviously this is sped up because this project took me like 3 or 4 days. I had over 4 hours of footage to edit down. So you saw me put on the olive green, the terracotta, and now I'm adding a turquoise. It's a fairly dark turquoise, and I'm going to continue doing that shadow technique. I will be picking this up with a chartreuse color, so I do want that chartreuse to be a bit more dominant. Here I'm adding a bit of Marabou metallic gold alcohol ink, which is not very strong, so it won't really show up in the final print. And I'm just doing that to add a bit of breaks to the blue. As that paint's drying, when I do this technique, it'll pick up more of that blue paint. You can see there's more spaces now. And then I add a bit of a turquoise colored alcohol ink, and that's going to be sort of my jumping off point for the flowers that I'm going to do. And I decided I want to add more alcohol ink to just give me more for my imagination to work with. You'll see what I mean in a moment. And I add a little bit more of this gold alcohol ink, and that just sort of breaks up some of that dark turquoise a little bit. So let that dry fully, and then I pick it up with the olive green and the fluorescent yellow to make my chartreuse color. And I just brayer it on there, and I'm going to use Carnival tissue to pick that up. That's a wet strength Carnival tissue. Again, this was gifted to me by Eddie Makes Art. Check him out, he does great prints. Give that a good rub, and I'm going to let that set while I work on the print I'm going to use for the vase that I'm planning, and I want the vase to be more of a terracotta color. So here I'm using my City Design stencil just to make some random abstract marks on the plate, and I don't want too much blue and green, so I do lift off quite a bit of that. So here I just lightly press down some cardstock to lift up a little bit of that paint. So let that dry before I add some of the burnt sienna that I'm using as my terracotta, because I don't want it to all mix together. And then I do the same thing, just using that stencil and flip it around to make some random patterns. And then let that dry. And then I'm using some black through the Fancy Fishnet to give more of a pattern to the print. And then I'll let that dry before picking it up with the burnt sienna and a vermilion color that I'm going to show here. Unfortunately, I missed pressing record, so I don't show that going on the plate, and I didn't show pulling off that Carnival tissue, but here's that Carnival tissue with our green print. And here I'm pulling up the terracotta base print, and I was quite happy with that. I thought it gave a real like terracotta pot kind of vibe, and I liked that it incorporated all the colors of the challenge. Here's my 12 by 12 canvas that I'm going to be using. It's just a cheapo canvas from Michael's, and I'm going to use this print that I did on the 12 by 14 plate. So I'm going to cut it down, and I decided to rip the edges using a ruler. That Carnival wet strength tissue is a little bit tricky to rip, but I wanted to rip it so that when I glue it on the front of the canvas, the edge that's exposed won't be too straight. It'll kind of meld in nicely. And I'm using some matte medium, a fair amount on there, and I'm just using a silicone spreader to spread it on the canvas and get lots on there. And then it was a little tricky doing this large piece. It doesn't look large because it's so far away, but it was tricky doing this with basically one hand because I wanted to try to make sure I didn't have bubbles forming. And I just kind of gradually worked it down onto the canvas. And you can see the lines of where the Carnival tissue is folded, even though I was trying to be careful when I put it on the plate, the Carnival tissue on the plate, to get rid of those wrinkles out. Some of them do show, but they do get camouflaged in the final print. And then I'm using more of that matte medium on the edges to just wrap the canvas on the two sides. And I'm covering the surface all in matte medium as well. So I've got the camera pretty far up. So I got just a little bit of leftover, which I'm going to use to wrap on the lower part of the canvas. You'll see in a moment. And I'm trying to spread and get all the bubbles out as much as I can. And then I'll use a brush to get rid of some of those ridges of the matte medium there. I just want to soften any of the lines, give it more of a canvas type texture. I didn't want any big streaks. So like I said, this took me about 3 or 4 days to do. I'm just cutting off that excess, and we'll use that a little bit later. And then I let the canvas dry overnight before going on to the next stage. So Sandrine's book is really about using an abstract background to fuel your imagination to see shapes. And her book isn't like a step-by-step, you're going to make this specific painting. It's really inspiration to use different materials. She doesn't actually use Gelliprints, but I wanted to use Gelliprints as my base. Most of this green you see is going to be obliterated in the final piece. And I also wanted to use a Gelliprint for the vase. So she doesn't do collage, like she doesn't cut out shapes and add them. It's all reverse painting. But I really wanted to incorporate a separate Gelliprint for this color combo challenge. To do her vases, she more paints out or adds glazes or different mediums to make the vase. So there I just traced out where I saw the vase being and the shape that I envisioned from the background. I used a black Posca here, which is nice because it's permanent, but you do have a bit of leeway time where you can wipe it off before it sets. And I traced it onto tracing paper, cut it out, and I'm going to use that to cut out the print. I'm just drawing in some overlapping shapes that I see I'm going to incorporate on top of the vase because I don't want to, I want to make sure that I don't paint those out. So now I'm using a white Posca pen, and she says just draw, the flowers you see or the leaves that you see. So that's what I'm doing here, and it's very fun and meditative. Here when I draw the stems, I decide I'm just going to draw one line for the stem, and when I paint it out, I'll make the thickness at that point. And I'm just using those little blobs of alcohol ink as my inspiration. So the composition of this, if you're cutting out things and collaging, you're thinking, okay, where am I going to put this or that? Here you're really letting the background abstract print guide your imagination, guide the composition. So there's probably some compositional errors in this print, but I don't care because I had fun making it. For example, I do a leaf going straight up off of that middle stem, which is probably, not correct. It's probably not really ideal, but I just wanted to put it there. That's where I felt it would go. And I do add a few more shapes later. Here I decide I'll use that one horizontal line on the bottom as my table, and I add a few leaves onto the table. And I'm drawing these out in white because most of her background she paints out in white, so that'll really blend in well. So there I'm drawing where I'm going to cut out the leaves from the vase, and I decide I don't like that flower shape on the tabletop, so I add a different leaf instead, and I'm going to totally obliterate that little blob you see there on the table. So here I'm using that tracing paper to cut out my vase, and it looks like I didn't take a lot of care where I put it, but I did kind of decide what part of that print I wanted to use. And like I said, she doesn't do any collage in the book, so she doesn't add, it's all reverse painting. but I wanted to, do it my own way. It's a really inspirational book. You don't have to follow step by step, but it has lots of great ideas in it. And here I'm just erasing some of those white lines before I glue down that vase shape. I'm going to be using some Pitt Artist pens, which are really an India ink pen, which is permanent. I'll show the colors I use for that a little bit later. So here's the part where you add your reverse painting. I decided I'm going to add one more flower down there. And I'm just using a Liquitex Basics white acrylic paint. And some of her paintings she leaves more of the background showing than others. I did end up doing kind of 2 coats here and there. I decided to use a stylus to scrape in the paint to make some little swirly, viney things. I don't think she did that in her book, but I just felt like doing it. So it's just using your imagination, let creativity flow. So here I thought I might leave that upper left corner kind of with more of the background showing through, but I do fill it in a little bit later. You'll see that. So you can see how I, even though I had one line for those stems, I paint it in such a way to make a thicker line. Making those little curly cues with the stylus really only work when the paint's still wet, so that's why I do them kind of like right away in each section. Now she does most of her backgrounds in white, but you could really do any color you wanted. The sky's the limit to your imagination. I really did like doing those little squiggly things. That was fun. I'm using my baby wipe to fix any mistakes. Here I'm just putting the vase in to see if there's other shapes I see, and I do add another little flower bud there. I'm erasing those leaves out before I attach that vase. So I'm just going around and just adding more white paint to fill in that background a little bit more and highlight those little curly cue viney things. You can see me typing off to the side sometimes. What I'm doing is I'm actually watching some live streams while I do this. I wasn't crazy about that blob, and the Posca had already dried. So I use a bit of alcohol on the baby wipe to get rid of that white Posca on that corner. I'm going to color the tablecloth a light turquoise, so I'm using white and the turquoise and a bit of that gloss glazing liquid to thin it out instead of water, because that can cause your paint to flake off if you put too much water. So I'm using the gloss glazing liquid so that it's more of a see-through. You can kind of see the pattern underneath. I do add a few layers so you don't see as much of the pattern in the end. And you might wonder, like, why am I obliterating my jelly print? And it's just the process. If you're too precious about your original jelly print, then maybe, use it a different way. And here I'm just seeing how that looks. I like leaving that little bit of shadow of the base print showing through. And I decide to fill in the centers of my flowers. I'm going to actually fill in the whole flower in the end, but it was, it does obliterate, like I said, a lot of the base print. A baby wipe's your best friend, or you could use a cloth just with some water on it. It's probably a bit more environmentally conscious to do that. And you can see that vertical line going up through the middle of the painting. That's actually going to get camouflaged eventually, so I'm not too worried about it. And I decide to use those leftover strips to cover just the sides of the canvas where the tablecloth is. So I'm using matte medium to attach those, and then I'm going to just print with that same glazing coat of turquoise to sort of wrap the tablecloth around the sides of the canvas. I think this would look really cool with like a chunkier canvas. Like this was just a pretty cheap, thin canvas, but I think you could, with practice, I might do some more of these. And here I'm using ultra matte gel to adhere my Gelliprints down. It's on a copy paper, which is pretty thick. And I learned this trick from Kathy Arbor. That gel, ultra matte gel, it doesn't have so much water in it, so it doesn't cause all the wrinkles that you might get. But it is very matte. So if I'd covered the top of the print with that ultra matte gel, it would make it look kind of milky. So I used just the matte medium, the liquid matte medium on the surface to sort of seal it down. So here I decide I'm going to add a bit more of leftover Gelliprints to that top left corner, and I'm going to add more white because I didn't find letting that amount of base show through on the side really was that helpful. Painting the top of the canvas, and I'm painting the sides white too, just so that it's the same white. These are the 3 colors of Pitt pens I end up using in this piece, and these are all brush tip. You can get them in different tips, but these are brush tips. And one of the things I like about using these is because they're India ink, they're permanent, but also they stay wet for a while, so you can smudge them with your finger to get some nice effects. So here's the Pitt pen I'm using to get rid of those white lines. I decided to add this Krylon Gold to the leaves, and I first found about this pen through Dee Willingham, and it's a really nice gold. I believe it's permanent. I hope so. And here I'm just adding some doodles to the leaves to make them more leaf-like. I could have overpainted with a glaze to make these more chartreuse colored, but I didn't. There you can see where I used the gold up that line, that vertical line, to camouflage it. And then I decide to add a little bit of a lighter turquoise glaze, using that gloss glaze medium. And you have to, watch the ratios of that as well. So I decide to fill in the petals because I didn't like the green flowers. I could have kept the green flowers and maybe doodled with turquoise instead, but choices. And I liked how the background was showing, but then I decide to add another layer because I don't know, I guess I didn't like how the background was showing after all. So I kind of obliterate the original Gelliprint, but that's okay because it's more the process. So Sandrine talks about how don't focus on the end result, focus on the process and the creativity and having fun while you're doing it. So these are just, nonsensical abstract flowers. The leaves look like leaves. Are they representative of a specific type of leaf? No, I don't know much about botany. So this is fun for me. I like doodling. So this is a really fun exercise. And again, I use that gold pen to camouflage that vertical line that's in that base print. And I decided to add a bit of gold circles to the inside of the flowers. And this is a Jane Davenport acrylic paint pen. I don't think you can get these anymore, but I didn't have this color Posca pen. So I'm just using this chartreuse color to add some highlights to some of those stems. Bring in that chartreuse color a little bit more. And I add a little bit to the vines. I don't totally trace them. I just add a little bit here and there. As you can see when I bring it in up close. I still wanted that base print to show through on those little viney things. And again, I use my finger to smudge it a little bit. Your fingers are really good tools to use. You always have them with you. Now I'm camouflaging that last vertical strip in the table. And I'm adding some shadows with the Pitt pen. I'm showing that up close of that. And here we're going to go to the warm gray. And I do a little shading under each of those little gold circles. So I don't show you all those. I kind of, show you the end, beginning and the end. And again, I use my finger to dab. You don't have to. It's kind of habit. Now I'm using that blue Pitt pen to make a line around each center of the flower just to help it stand out a little bit more. And I want it blended. I don't want it a harsh line, so again I use my finger. Almost looks like a ballpoint pen, but it's not. Add a little bit of shading to these flower buds with the same pen. I could have added more doodles to those flower buds, but I just decided to keep those pretty simple because we're going to add some doodles to the petals of the big flowers, the big blooms. So here we are using just a white Posca pen, just adding some doodly shapes. So these are abstract flowers. They're doodle flowers, if you will. So that's where the imaginary flower part comes from in her book title. And before I add the doodles on this double petaled bloom, I decide to add some shading around that first section. I'm using a Q-tip with a bit of a baby wipe on there because my finger wasn't quite fine enough to fit in some of those spaces. I let that dry and I doodle a different flower while I'm waiting. I love doodling. To me, this really inspired me just to use the abstract background to fuel your imagination, add some doodles. It doesn't have to be realistic, right? And her, all her images or paintings are quite flat looking. Like I did add some shading to the vase coming up, but I wouldn't have had to. Like her style, it's very flat. But I couldn't help myself adding like the shadows under the base and highlighting, the edges of the base. So there we've got all our flowers doodled. So I start using that Posca to add the shading, but I find when I try to smudge it, a lot of the Posca just kind of wipes away. So instead I switch over to that warm gray Pitt pen. And again, I'm just using my finger to smudge it out, add some shading under the flower petals and under the leaves. I do like the brush tip quite a bit. I highly recommend the brush tips. Very versatile. You can use the pointy end or you can use the side of it to get more width. So I did have to wash my hands quite a bit when I did this project. Inky fingers. And I decided to add a little doodle, like a little rim to the base. So I hope this isn't too boring. I wanted to show all the steps that I did. I didn't show it in real time. I know some people don't like, fast forwarded videos, but really it was so much footage. I couldn't make myself do it real time. And then I'm adding some shading to the leaves and the flowers that are overlapping. Again, using the Pitt Artist pens. A bit more shading under those leaves on the table. This time with the gray, the warm gray. Now I'm using a glass dip pen into Bombay ink, which is also India ink, and it's a teal color. And I'm using that to add a little bit more dimension to the petals that I doodled on there. And again, I'm smudging it with a Q-tip, a wet Q-tip. Actually, it's like a baby wipe wrapped on a Q-tip. I'm definitely going to do this technique again. I just had a lot of fun. I'm going to try to keep it a bit more loose next time and try to have more of the base print showing through. That's my goal. I'm just adding some doodles onto the centers of those flowers. So it's a pretty subtle addition, but when you look in the final up close shots, it does make it, I think it makes a difference. And it was fun. And I used a bit of a paintbrush with a bit more water to get that ink to flow a little bit more in some spots. And then I'm adding a bit more shading to the stems and the leaves using that green pit pen. So I encourage you, if you find this a fun technique, I mean, I sort of put my own spin on it, but I highly recommend this book that I learned about through Kathy Arbor. And again, the links to her flip through of this book, as well as her painting inspired by this book, will be in the description below. I do like this color combo that Carrie and Paula put out, the turquoise, the terracotta, and the chartreuse. I have a lot of turquoise in my house, so I'm planning to hang this painting up. It felt so big when I was working on it. Like, I was like, wow, this is a really big piece. But then when I put it in my living room, I'm like, oh, that's really small. 12 by 12 isn't, very big when you're, looking at a whole room. So maybe someday I'll do some larger canvas in this style after I, get used to this technique. Real time me talking now. So here we have the finished, well, not finished. I don't think it's finished. So that's my point, is I think it's almost finished, and I wish it didn't turn out the way I really wanted. I wanted more of the base print to be showing through here. Really the only base print showing through the leaves. And you kind of see hints of it, but I wanted more of the abstraction to be there. I feel like it kind of lost that. And this style is meant to be fairly flat. Like, it's not meant to be, realistic. It's meant to be like abstract. And she put lots of interest in her vases and her tables. And I don't want to add anything to the terracotta vase because I feel like I've got like some of the other colors from the challenge already in there, and I like that. So I'm thinking I want to add something to the tablecloth. So, she has different examples, and I thought maybe we should, she drew all those patterns. I'm going to use the stencil because I really wanted to bring the stencil back. And initially I thought I should bring back my original pattern, like the fancy fishnet, but I was finding that I didn't like how it would be so symmetrical because of this larger area. And then if I went this way, I just didn't think it worked for this application. So I pulled out some other stencils, some PM Artist Studio stencils. For example, I thought this one would be interesting, but I didn't want to block out too much of the blue because I'm thinking I'm going to pounce with some white to stay in the color challenge theme. So this has more of an Asian feel, which I don't know really goes with that. And then I thought these bubbles would be cute, but again, it would disrupt a lot of the blue. I thought I could even like put them on an angle. So that's kind of an option. But again, I don't want it to be all white. I want it to be mostly blue. I thought this was kind of cute. These are all PM Artist Studio stencils. So that would be pretty good. And then Paula Keen's Ruin blocks would be neat. I was very tempted with this one. But in the end, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little ATC. I thought about these two. I like how a lot of the background's going to be staying in there. So I think I'm going to just stencil these in. I think it'll kind of show the roundness. I don't think I'm going to do the chartreuse because I don't want to compete with the chartreuse in the leaves. We're going to pounce on this pattern. So rather than just use plain white, I decided to add just a touch of turquoise to make a light turquoise color. It was too much pigment, so I did a little side dollop of white, and I'm going to combine those two and just make it a really light, subtle pattern on that table or tablecloth, using a little bit of washi tape to block out the edge and some tracing paper so I don't pounce on the vase. Although it would have been easy to wipe it off after. But so here I'm using a sponge and I'm, pouncing into the paint, and I'm on the upper tray you see there, I'm taking off a lot of paint so it doesn't go underneath the stencil. I'm also wiping off where I want the shadows to remain so that it's sort of like a soft shadow. Now here I'm showing the black and white version of before the doodles, with the doodles, and then the final print. And I've heard about, looking at your composition in black and white to get a sense of balance. And that was one of the techniques that Sandrine mentioned in her book. And I did find it interesting and helpful, so I just wanted to show you that. So I think I'm going to consider that done. I like just the soft bit of detail that those stencils added on the bottom, and I did carry it around the edges like so. So I'll just give you one last close-up look. I'm filling this in just natural daylight today. I'll probably varnish this at some point. I won't show that on camera, but I'll probably do spray varnish and then maybe a coat varnish. So I enjoyed this. It's not, am I 100% happy with it? No. Am I happy with it for a first attempt at a canvas doing like an abstract botanical? Yes, I think I'm happy with it. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed doing this color combo challenge. Chartreuse, turquoise, terracotta, black, white, and some metallic. I do wish I had a little bit more chartreuse in this, but I did try to, leave these little squiggly vines open and add a bit more chartreuse to that. So, all right, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.